Order the Planning Committee 2022. So at that point in time, can we ask for a roll call? Director Chansky.
Erickson.
Here.
Gorham.
Here.
Calroos.
Here.
Woodward.
Here.
Yeager.
Yes.
And Duval.
Here. All right, thank you for that. Let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. All right, our next item of business is election of officers. I think probably the way we ought to, my suggestion for handling is if we have contested offices, let's vote by anonymous paper ballot. Maybe David could tally things like that. Otherwise, we can do voice vote if that seems reasonable for folks. All right, so with that, I guess I'd be opening the floor for nominations for chair.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Gorham.
I would like to make a nomination of a slate of candidates, Mr. Duval as the chair and Ms. Woodward as the vice chair.
All right. Do we have other nominations for the floor? Do we have other nominations from the floor? Last call, we have other nominations from the floor. All right, well, it appears we have a slate, and maybe we can just vote the slate straight. So all those in favor of the slate that has been proposed here, Duval chair, Woodward vice chair, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and all opposed, same sign. All right, business is on. So, looking for approval or amendments to the agenda.
Move to approve, Yeager. Second.
All right, second Gorham, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, same sign. All right, we're moving to item number 6, approval of the minutes. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
So move. Erickson.
Erickson, second, somebody?
Second.
Woodward, second. Okay, any discussion on those minutes? I have a point on agenda old business item 6A, outdoor lighting. I believe our conversation was that we had discussion and consensus to add a color standard. Can others help me recall our meeting there? We had discussion on it. I felt that we had some consensus to get some color standards added or recommendations from our consultants. Does that?
I'd recall that being mentioned. I don't remember the specifics, but.
If we could make that addition there. Are there any other discussion on those minutes? Go hearing none. All in favor of the amended minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right. We are now to item number 7, zoning code update. Is our James, is our consultant online or available? Excellent. Okay, so at this point, David Jansky, would you care to just kind of quickly set us up, and then let's take to our consultants?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So in your packet, you'll see you have a proposed zoning map and a proposed table of uses. Myself and James, we met with Jennifer on the 6th of this month. We spent about 4.5 hours on a Thursday afternoon working through the zoning map, this proposed zoning map in detail, making sure we seem to capture everything that we've discussed over the last 14 months in this proposed zoning map. And then also spending a little time near the end on the also proposed table of uses that you have in your packet. So before I hand it over to Jennifer, I think really what Jennifer and Mike are here just to kind of maybe talk about the proposed zoning map, get your initial reactions, and your any comments you have on the map. If there's any things that you feel like are inaccurate or should be, or you're looking just for clarification on, just so you are aware. The goal here is tonight, as we continue to move forward through the adoption process of the code, that we're kind of starting out in that phase of this process, is get the commission's comments, on the zoning map tonight. And then I'm going to be bringing this zoning map with any corrections you might have to the council on February 7th for their comments as well. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would encourage you to hand it over to Jennifer and Mike.
Thank you. Mike, are you or Jennifer up?
We are.
Excellent.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. It's nice to be with you guys. I think this is the first time we've been with you virtually in a long time. So hopefully this works out in terms of going through the zoning map and the allowed uses. David set it up pretty well. We spent an enormous amount of time going through every parcel, trying to make sure that the zoning district that we assigned matched with what the regulations were or that we've identified in our draft zoning district section. So a couple things that I want to highlight before we get into the details is that part of this process, if you guys recall, was really doing this GIS analysis to try to understand and bring most of your parcels into conformance to the extent possible. So the zoning districts that are assigned on the zoning map match with those minimum dimensional standards, for example. We looked at lot sizes, setbacks, proximity to roadways, what uses were on them, et cetera, to try to figure out what district it most closely aligned with so that we're bringing as much into conformance as possible. So in terms of how we mapped it, that was our number one priority. The second statement I will make is that there are certain parcels in the community that we looked at that are more about what we think might happen in the future. So it's matching up with what you identified in your future land use plan and the comprehensive plan and making sure that the zoning that we're assigning matches up or supports what you said you wanted to see from a future land use perspective. So that was the second part of the analysis. The third thing that I will mention is that there are actually a couple tweaks that we've made to the zoning districts that you may have noticed as you were going through this, and I just want to highlight those because as we've been working over the last 6 months or so, for example, we had at one point in time 2 commercial corridor types of designations, the CC1 and the CC2. And after meeting with staff, we decided, you know what, there really wasn't much of a distinction between those and then the general commercial. And that really, it made more sense to kind of create 2 districts as opposed to 3 to better match what we were looking at. So there were a couple of tweaks like that. Those will make their way obviously into the language of the code as well. But that is reflected on the zoning map, which we talked with staff on the 6th about. So trying to think if there's really anything else in terms of changes or something that might have stuck out to you. I'm actually looking at my own map as well. The other piece I guess I would say is that we had maps on this 2 overlay districts, and those overlay districts, one of them being the manufactured housing overlay, which is consistent with today you've got a zoning district. The way we're applying this today is actually to give it an overlay district and then assign it the base zoning district underneath it. And then also your Northern Pacific Center is currently a mixed use designation and really treating that more as a PUD overlay that is overlaid on top of the base zoning district, which in this case is town center. So those 2 overlay districts are also present, which when we went through all of the narratives of the draft code, we haven't touched on. So that's a really high level of the zoning map itself. Mike, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add, but hopefully that sets us up for some conversation about the map.
No, I don't have a lot to add other than that, we do have a couple of districts that are not mapped here, and we anticipate in the future, should there be a need for some of those particular districts like TN3, that those would be mapped in the future, so.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. Actually, just so that TN3 is the one that is not mapped, so you don't see it in the legend, but we have not dropped that out of the code narrative section yet. And it will obviously remain. And then everything else that's in your legend is reflected on the map somewhere. So that's a good point.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
I just want to, Jennifer pointed out the moving from essentially three commercial districts to two. I just want to dive into that a little bit more, just so the commission is fully aware. Where that really came from is part of the discussion that was had back in the beginning of November with the city council when the commercial districts were brought before the city council for discussion. If you remember, they kind of had CC1, CC2, that commercial corridor. CC1 at the time it was presented had more of a traditional setback requirement to it, while CC2 was designed to bring buildings pretty much all the way up to the property line. Well, after meeting with council, what council's desire was what they foresaw along Washington, specifically from the river to about Fifth Avenue Northeast, is they would like to see the future being buildings brought to that curb. They want to continue to accentuate that feel of that more of that corridor and not have things pushed away. They felt if you continue to push buildings back, it actually accentuates the feeling of it being a highway and not more of a neighborhood boulevard. So by bringing that kind of being their desire for the emphasis, the CC2 kind of became really became what was now CC1. And then when we looked at CC2, we realized there really wasn't that much of a difference between CC2 and general commercial, the GC1. There really wasn't much of a difference that we felt deserved its own district. And again, as we've talked about throughout this code, trying to make this code as simple as possible, not having unnecessary zoning districts. We felt that the GC1 pretty much solved everywhere else. For example, you look at the West Brainerd area of 210, that already, currently, it's a newer area, commercial area. It already has a very different feel than the section between the river and the East Brainerd Mall. Council also agreed that has a different feel. It doesn't really need to change. Don't necessarily want it to feel like that section between the river and the East Brainerd Mall. So that was really the reason why we pretty much got rid of that one commercial corridor district. So now we have one general commercial district, one commercial corridor district, and that's pretty much how we got to that.
Thank you, David. And did we lose the gateway concept? How are we managing the gateway concept? I thought one of those commercials was managing the entry points into the city. Are we going to have a different approach to that?
And I'll let Jennifer, if you want to kind of address that.
So again, this goes back to making sure that the zoning supports your future land use plan. So those gateway areas still remain. That's handled through your land use, guidance, if you will, in terms of what you'd like to see. The performance standards or design standards are what start to establish what that sort of gateway feeling is. And so those will now apply to the commercial corridor section primarily. And then if there's anything additional that we need to pay attention to, that those would find their way into the performance standards essentially, as opposed to the zoning district or dimensional standards.
So to that point, if there's specific things that the planning commission and the council want to keep in mind for those other areas, the far east side or the far west side of town, Jennifer said that'd be more in that performance standard where we could say something along all properties abutting 210 have to meet a certain standard, be it a facade standard or a landscape standard or certain things. So they're still technically GC1, but unlike other general commercial properties, maybe they have to have a certain type of facade or things like that. So we can add that as that performance standard, because in that easy relation would be probably relation to Highway 210 or Business 371.
So you're looking for high-level feedback at this point, Jennifer and Mike, is that, or do you want to continue with the presentation?
To me, I think it makes sense if we do some high-level feedback on the map, and then we can move to the allowed uses table, just to kind of keep them two separate discussions. They're obviously related, but I think it's kind of difficult to go back and forth probably. So in terms of the map, if you have, there's a couple different ways we can do this, and David, certainly chime in terms of your preference. If you have high-level comments tonight, obviously we can dig back into it. If there's something specific, like you find a small parcel or what have you that you feel like is just zoned inappropriately or that you're questioning, you also could circle that, provide that to staff, and we can dig into it to make sure that it's matching up with what the standards we established for the district were. Because obviously that's our number one priority, is to make sure that whatever we're zoning it is either matching the future land use condition or it matches the existing, lot dimensions, et cetera.
All right, thank you then. So with that then, maybe let's get to some high-level feedback on the map. Anyone care to make any suggestions or observations and clarifications? Mr. Erickson.
Just a clarification, I have a question for either Jennifer or David. And I like the description of this makers and employment zone, but can you explain to me what differentiates that from the general commercial? And it looks like there's just that one spot that's the maker and employer.
So I think the biggest difference is, I think when we discussed this with council, maybe the planning commission in December, is going to be more of that performance standard. In your industrial, building standards kind of go out the window. If you can be a more industrial sized building, feel of a building. While in the maker employment district, we're going to have more performance standards of how that building has to look. What kind of light, when we say light manufacturing, a little more control of size. So you're not having something that really belongs in the industrial park in light manufacturing. Again, maker and employment space. A maker employment, again, is that more of you're just starting out. Maybe you need 1,000 to 5,000 square feet. You can go there before you hopefully expand and need space in the industrial park. So it'd be more of that performance standard. I think it's pretty much get that right there, Jennifer.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to that is the difference between the makers and employment and the general commercial district, for example, is that the amount of space in the makers and employment dedicated to a retail or sort of commercial customer-facing experience might be much smaller than in a general commercial environment where, there's a lot of expectation that customers are going to be coming in and out, or clients. The makers and employment, there might be a very small area where, let's say a potter or something is selling some of their pottery from the front in a very small space, but the majority of it is workspace. It's, so that division of how the space is used is different.
Very good, thank you.
Other questions of staff for clarification, discussion? I struggle with the definition of the maker's employment that really speaks to establishing small startups, incubator, craft maker business that are appropriate in the town center and neighborhood business areas. The only place I find it on the map is in West Brainerd, there along the railroad and the Paul Bunyan Trail extension. And to me, I'm still trying to get my head around that particular district, and it feels to me still like an overlay would work better. I can think about the printing. Was it Lakes Printing there on 13th and Oak? A few other places where we have similar kinds of uses that an overlay would fit to those kinds of things. We've got the door and sash place over there by the Washington School. The overlay would simply work there. I would struggle to see, as we get into the uses seem pretty aggressive for for town center and neighborhood areas. And so that's why I still need more help with thinking about this particular use. Am I seeing it anywhere else in West Brainerd? Is that the only place there on the south side of 210 along the railroad tracks?
Yep, that's the only part along
Okay.
Charles Street.
Yeah.
And I'll start with this, and then I'll let Jennifer chime in for additional. When we had this discussion in December, and we had that overlay discussion, then when we met with staff on the 6th, one of the things that stuck out to us in the discussion in December was, do we want a zone for what is there now or what we want there to be? And one thing that we kind of heard is, while it's okay, what we kind of heard in December was, while it's okay to have, some of those uses down there on the east side of Laurel now, do we necessarily want them to be there 10 years from now? Do we want to encourage further there? And while an overlay could work in theory instead of an actual zoning district, the overlay still gives certain rights. So someone could still just go in there and do it, if they meet the criteria, not necessarily have to ask permission to do those things. And so that's where we felt based off of what we heard in December, we couldn't figure out how do we balance allowing, again, using the east side of Laurel, because that was one of the main examples, allowing these uses to continue on the east side of Laurel while also encouraging it to develop into something else. So it's kind of because on one hand you want, there's this light industrial, but then if they're encouraging it, we want to see it to develop into more town center feel, maybe some housing and other commercial. Those two things are a little contrary to each other. So I think that's where we kind of just left at least that east side of Laurel alone. Again, when looking at the city, kind of a 10,000-foot view, this was the only section in the city that we felt really kind of fits it today, and in the only section of the city where we're saying, 10, 15 years down the road, we feel like it'd still be appropriate to have that use there.
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question. You're saying east of Laurel, do you really mean east of like 8th Street? Laurel's
Yes,
in
east side, east end of Laurel, I'm sorry, east end
Yeah,
of Laurel.
okay,
Yep,
thank you.
east of 8th Street on Laurel.
Okay, good.
So if I could chime in just one
Yes,
moment
Jen.
too on that. So, Mr. Chair, I think what you're really touching on is that the definition that is in your summary today was taken from when it was presented initially and hasn't been updated to reflect what the map really told us once we dug into it. I know that sounds probably funny, like the map is speaking to us, but when we dug into the data, as David said, the portion or the area that we identified for the makers in employment really fits the definition and is what's happening on the ground today. But that doesn't match the description at the moment. So I think what we need to do is update that description now to reflect the map if you're comfortable with where we have it mapped.
And I think that, thank you, Jennifer, and I do think that would resolve the conflict for me on this. These just didn't resonate, and then I think at that point you can begin to then plan forward in time where you want these kinds of uses. Now I get it. If we're trying to plop this down in the town center or in these neighborhoods like Oak and Kingwood, it's, to me, that what we've got here doesn't cut it. So thank you. Mr. Gorham.
Thank you. We do have a business right now, Minnesota Makerspace, right in the heart of the business district on 7th Street that is manufacturing, that does do light manufacturing right there. It's totally appropriate. He does retail and he also builds things right there. That would speak to why an overlay could be handy. You could recognize that as a business that is in harmony with the other businesses downtown, it's a productive use, and, so that's my 2 cents worth there. We do have an example downtown of somebody who's doing light manufacturing. Not all the time, but yeah, he manufactures downtown, which is great.
Mr. Chair, if I can
Yes,
respond to
sir.
that really quick. And I think this gets to when we get to the kind of maybe lead to the table of uses discussion as well, as what kind of uses. And I think how we're looking at the the town center and the main street would still allow for what Minnesota Makerspace is doing. The difference is from what they're doing, or even technically even E.L. Mink Jewelers technically does manufacturing as well with their jewelry, is the kind of manufacturing they're doing. I would call it very, very light manufacturing versus what we allow in the employment and makers space district would actually be like full on, fabrication or furniture making, kind of that a little step up from I think from maybe what Minnesota Makerspace is doing. They have a very, very small retail spot, maybe enough space for someone to come in and place an order or work with someone on what they would like to have made, but then the 90% of the building is used towards producing something versus Minnesota Makerspace is less than that, I should say. And then there is still, and what I would say with Minnesota Makerspace, at least in my opinion, there is also more of an experience element as well, as in people can go there to make things. So there's that a little more of an experience aspect to Minnesota Makerspace as well. And then,
Thank you, that's good.
Other comments or questions for the consultants or staff? Seeing none, Jennifer, maybe I'll give you the talking stick again and you can carry us forward.
Sure thing, Mr. Chair. So if we move on to the table of uses, well, first of all, if you can get excited about a table of uses, I'm excited about a table of uses. So this is a pretty, it's a pretty significant departure from what's in your current code. And the idea really is to make it easier for you folks and also for city staff moving forward, that if someone comes in, you can look at the table of uses, look up what somebody is requesting, and you know exactly what type of permitting process is necessary, or whether or not it's permitted, not permitted, et cetera. So the way that the draft table is laid out, and I'm in no way suggesting this is perfect, and I'm assuming there's going to still be some significant edits, because I started by tracking changes in this, and it was so messy that I don't know that you could have read any of it. So I'm going to guess you'll have some edits as well. But the way this is laid out is to essentially sort of organize it by use type to a certain extent to make it easier to navigate. So you've got residential uses first, or what are typical residential uses, then commercial general business uses. We move on to, I think it's public, semi-public uses, and then industrial and utility uses. So the idea here is that if somebody comes in, you can kind of navigate to the topic or the type of use that they're looking at and look on that table of uses to get a sense of whether or not it's something that you as a community permit. And if you do, what's that process look like? Is it a conditional permit? Is it an administrative permit, et cetera? The other thing that we tried to do here, which hopefully, again, I don't know that we have it perfect, but I think we're headed in the right direction, is to consolidate a lot of your uses into one category or one description. So for example, when we first started this process of listing everything out, you had listed a brewery, I think 7 different ways, depending on where you were within the ordinance. So the idea of let's list it one time so it's a consistent, term, and then figuring out based on the zoning district whether or not it was something that was conditionally permitted or not permitted at all. In terms of the table right now, anything that's a blank, just to give you a sense, is not permitted. So when you're reading it, we just did not fill in the ends because I find it's very difficult for people to keep track of where they're at when everything's filled in. So as soon as we get the rest of it correct, we'll go back in and put the ends in for not permitted. But at this point, we left those as blank so that you could it was a little bit easier for you for editing and taking a look at. So that's a pretty high level. The one thing I will say, which I missed on the zoning map, so I just want to make sure to call your attention to it. One thing we did do with staff on the 6th was actually also add in a public, semi-public zoning districts. And then that makes its way onto this table as well. And the reason behind that, and David can certainly add onto it, this is my understanding based on our conversation, is that there are some larger campus types of uses, like the hospital, the college, the high school campus, for example, that really function kind of as community gathering spaces and gathering for different purposes, or might have a mix of sort of community uses that are a mix of public and semi-public uses. And so by creating a zoning district, we're able to better tailor the regulations and the standards to that and hopefully avoid some of the variances, for example, that you've had to process as a result of not having a specific zoning district that accommodates it. So on the table, you'll see PSP specifically addresses that zoning category. And then also we categorize some of the uses in particular as public, semi-public, just in terms of, schools, churches, if they're large campuses or mixed use, et cetera. So that's a very high level description of the table of uses. Once again, I think if you've got high level feedback, we're happy to hear that tonight. And then if you want to go back, I think David and I talked about maybe having you guys go back and mark this table up yourselves and giving it back to us. We can kind of synthesize your comments and take a look at it. So David, I don't know if there's more you'd like to add to that, but that's a really high level description of the table.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would just agree with Jennifer. Again, tonight, we're not necessarily looking to go through every single use and whether it's right, anything that stood out to you right away, the organization of this. Again, what we think we'd really encourage you to do is go through with your own fine-tooth comb later and then submit anything to me. We can get that back to Jennifer and Mike. Also want to reiterate again with the public, semi-public uses. If you go to the zoning map, you'll see that, for example, under semi-public uses, you'll see things like churches. Not every church in the city is zoned public, semi-public. Not every school is zoned public, semi-public. And again, that goes back to what is the setting, what is the size of that campus. So a lot of the churches in North Brainerd, they're sitting on what is essentially one or two, a double lot. They're not a big, like taking up a whole block, versus if you go to Southeast Brainerd, you have St. Andrews that literally takes up an entire block. Therefore that one was zoned public, semi-public, just to the size of the location. Got the high school zone public, semi-public. Harrison Elementary is zoned TN. What do we think of TN2? Again, what is the how big is the site and what's surrounding it determined its zoning. So I think that's all I have to add to what Jennifer stated.
Thank you, David. So, and maybe similarly, we approach this with maybe some high-level feedback or points of clarification on the table of uses. Are there questions of clarification that folks have on the table of uses here at the commission? Jennifer, or David probably, what happened to food trucks? Did we lose food trucks in the business here? I'm thinking we moved that from an overlay to sort of a use, and I wonder if we want to revisit that one. I was thinking from the revision of the ordinance that we did that transient food units, I believe is the word, and I think that would be in all the commercial and industrial districts, and an asterisk maybe for the public, semi-public ISD 181 exceptions that we had done, CLC Franklin Arts Center. So we might see if we can add that in. I think that belongs there. Are there other thoughts or observations? I've got, David, short-term rentals are all interim uses, and I was trying to think about why that is or how that reconciles with Section 6.1 purpose of intent. We've got three purposes there. I was trying to figure out which purpose that one fit, and whether we even need that if we're going to bring those under rental licensing and so forth, so maybe
Yep.
help me understand that
So
one.
they're currently IUPs in the current code. Short-term rentals are. The reason we're leaving them as our recommendation is leave them as interim uses. A couple things. One, short-term rentals generally do have a little bit of a separate impact than a permanent or long-term rental. One of our recommendations, Jennifer and I were talking about, James and I are kind of working on some new code language. The current code language really doesn't fit. It seems like when the city adopted it, it kind of took the language from like a hotel and then applied it to short-term rentals, which really doesn't work because, for example, a short-term rental can't apply for certain licensing that a hotel can, so it doesn't really work. Plus, I don't know if we really care that why does a short-term rental need to be inspected by the Department of Health, but a long-term rental doesn't? It didn't really seem to make sense. But the differences is that coming and going factor, is that people are constantly coming and going. A lot of feedback you hear about short-term rentals, your kind of discussions going on through the county right now too, is regarding noise complaints, activity issues that go along in the short-term rentals, capacity issues with these short-term rentals. And so the idea of having an IUP is, again, just to kind of a little more control that aspect that you get with a short-term rental that you don't necessarily get with a rental where someone that is their permanent place of residence. So that's why our recommendation is to keep it as an IUP versus a permanent rental is a permitted use.
And I can see all of the good reasons for wanting to have sort of that temporary use authorized by permit. I'm just trying to think about how it fits into our interim uses in the ordinance now, or whether we need to add something to that effect to get at more specifically, because I don't see that it's a brief period of time until a permanent location is obtained. That's not the intent of that. A use that's presently judged acceptable but anticipated development, it may not in the future. I don't quite see that one fitting. And then the long-range plan, it may become acceptable in the future. I don't see that one either. So I'm just wondering how we better connect that one in particular to that, or whether it can be satisfactorily managed under the rental code as a different way of going about it, and say maybe we don't put that in.
Jennifer, Mike, do you have any feedback on that to Chairman Duval's question?
So, Mr. Chair, what I think I understand that you're saying is that sort of the description in the administration section, if you will, where it's the support for, how or why you use an interim use permit doesn't adequately match up, in your opinion, a short-term rental. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right, as we're intending to use it.
Yeah, so what I would recommend is actually, we're not quite at the administration section, if you will, but what I would recommend is that we tweak that language a little bit, because I think there might be a couple other types of uses that may fall into the category, because really what you're getting at is there are uses that you're okay with, to regulate by time or time period, which you cannot do with a conditional use permit. So you don't want to necessarily give someone a conditional use permit for a Vrbo or Airbnb. So it really is a time delimited activity. And it's also something that you also want there to be a process. So folks know that it's occurring and you can put reasonable conditions on it, et cetera, because it has the potential to have more intensity than the use or the principal use or primary use that's occurring in that district. So I think my answer is we should look at that language for interim use permits, because we are regulated by statute in terms of what you can do with an IUP. But I think there's a little bit of wiggle room in there that would better match up with a Vrbo. And then there might be some other uses also on your table that you might feel like better fit that as well.
I think that's a good solution, just to address that language. Any other comments or questions on the table of uses? And to your opening comments, Jennifer, I'm really excited to see this stuff in one place. I don't know if filling in the blanks with ends is very helpful, or whether you have a description. It just, because it's really easy to track right now, but if every square in the matrix get covered, maybe you can use color or something else.
Yeah, color coding would be
Yeah, so it's a
huge,
shade.
huge help here, yeah, because even navigating just the letters, color coding would be super slick with the letters, for sure.
But this is hugely useful in being able to, at a glance, kind of go down and find your use, and, or your intended use, and where is it allowed. So it's really visually easy to use. So just a suggestion on that. Okay,
Thank you. I'm good. I'm just going to reiterate what you just said. The layout and the format is, the ease of use is really good.
great, okay. Well, David, any next steps here? To me, it looks like, maybe there's, you want, maybe the detail of these things. Do we want to set a date where, if we can get it to you by such and such time, you can compile and hand over to Jennifer?
If you all could have that to me by, say, next Friday, the 28th, then I can get that back to Jennifer and Mike.
I am seeing general body language that says, yep, we can do that. So basically, comments, and you'll take those as scratchy pieces of paper with lots of ink, or redoing, or markups, or whatever, you'll take it in
Whatever you
whatever
want,
form.
we can do that.
Okay, Mr. Erickson,
Yeah, just, sorry to, one clarification. By the 28th or by end of business on the 28th? It makes a difference.
Can we have it by noon on the 28th? So then I can get it to
I
Jennifer by the
want
end
to
of the day
clarify
on the
what end of the
28th.
day 28th is then. Is that 5 o'clock or is that 6? What time is that?
I think we heard noon now, did we not?
59.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we will get comments there, and if it comes in probably at 4 o'clock, I bet it would probably find its way to our consultants. But in respect to time for them to be able to compile that stuff, there'll be a little bit of work in trying to organize this. But very good. Well, I'm excited to see the product, so thank you very much. Are there other pieces of information that you'd like to report to us, Jennifer?
I do not have anything else, Mr. Chair. I think we're making really good progress. And so we talked at the meeting last week a little bit about schedule, and I think you will see a full draft within the next couple of weeks coming forward. So we're in a good position to move forward. So it's exciting.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your continued good work, and unlike the last time where we dragged you up here with some wild weather and such coming through, this seemed to work pretty well for the purposes that we're doing, so glad we didn't drag you up again. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Stay warm.
That's relative.
It relatively, yes. Take care.
Thank you. All right, we're moving on to new business, item 8A, Supportive Housing Village PUD conceptual review. Rick Chansky, could you set this up for us, please?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So Vicki Kinney has submitted a request for a concept review of a proposed planned unit development, or PUD, for a supportive housing community. As she listed in her application, made up of some small cottages, a clubhouse, and 1 or 2 more accessory use buildings. Her proposed PUD request is for a 3-phase development. Where this is going to be, James, want to pull up the map real quick? It's going to be kind of an east-west boundary between Northwest 4th and Northwest 2nd, and between James and, I think actually really should be said, and Jackson Streets. You want to do the map on the, you do that one or the one on the public notice, or the notice of hearing, James? That one as well, I think should be, there you go. That's the PUD. So this is something, I think, something that this commission hasn't done before. So Mr. Chairman, I just want to run through really quick kind of what we're here to do tonight. So per section 515-11-1, that's the administration of a planned unit development. I listed in your code. I won't go all the way through it in the memo of what the purpose and intent of a planned unit development is. Again, the idea here is just to allow more some creativity and efficiency in development of land and its improvements that would otherwise be possible in our zoning code. So pretty much anytime someone wants to do something, they kind of have two options. Option one being take whatever the base land use is and do a development that fits the criteria within that base land use, or they can come before the city, request a planned unit development. Still, certain base criteria would apply, but it really loosens up things like lot size, building size, uses to an extent. How our current ordinance reads, you'd still have to match whatever only allowable uses that are in that base district. But allows you to free up some of those requirements, and it kind of becomes really a negotiation between the city and a developer. Per section 51511-11, the purpose of the general concept review, which we're here tonight, is to provide an opportunity for the applicant to submit a plan to the city showing basic intent and the general nature of the entire development before incurring substantial cost. Additionally, this concept plan serves as the basis for public comment, so the proposal may be publicly considered at an early stage. Again, this is the opportunity for the applicant to come forward saying, hey, this is what I'm looking at doing. Here's generally where I'm looking to do it. What does the city think about that? Do you have any concerns? Are you in favor of it? Before they really incur, they start going down that process of having a lot of engineering and incurring the thousands and thousands of dollars to go through really developing an actual plan and development. It is important to note in section E of 11-11 that the plan unit development concept approval only provides direction for the applicant to proceed to the development stage of a PUD. It does not convey any development rights or privileges to the applicant. Again, this is just kind of providing feedback. You would be making a recommendation to the city council tonight, and then the city council would also make their own concept review based off of your recommendation as well. Again, just providing direction to the developer as to how they might want to proceed with their concept. In your packet as well, I listed from the section 515-11 kind of the process for this review. The applicant is here tonight. Ms. Kinney is here to answer any of your questions concerning the proposed development. Then after that, it's your turn to just kind of discuss amongst yourselves and decide what kind of recommendation you want to make to the city council. And then that recommendation will go to the city council for them to consider and give feedback to Ms. Kinney. One thing I do want to note is that 515-11 does not require a public hearing during the general concept plan stage. The applicant, upon staff's recommendation, did request that the Planning Commission conduct a formal public hearing, again, just to get more feedback early on before any big investment is made into this project. So as such, we did follow the policies for doing a notice of hearing, and all properties within 300 feet of the proposed development area did receive a notice of hearing. Additionally, it's our understanding that Ms. Kinney did mail a letter to some of the surrounding properties as well. In the current zoning code, finally, Mr. Chair, this area is zoned certain areas it's zone R1 and R2 and R3. And per the proposed zoning map you just saw, the proposed area for this would be TN2, Traditional Neighborhood 2, should this the map be adopted and the code be adopted as proposed. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll answer any questions that the commission has right off the bat.
Thank you. Questions for staff? David, could you, and I didn't have a chance to look at the current underlying zoning for the three different phases, if you would. I think it's
I believe
R3.
phase 1 is R3, and then phases 2 and 3 are R2.
So that section between Northwest 3rd and 4th is a 2 or 3?
Let me double check that. I believe it's a 2, but I can just try to double check that really quick. It might be R3. Why is this not? Gotta pull up that map. Second, Mr. Chair. Here we go. Gotta pull this map. And maneuver to my spot. Waiting for this webpage to load. Apologize for the delay. So as clarification, the section between Northwest 2nd and Northwest 3rd is R2. And then the section between Northwest 3rd and 4th and against, on the north side along Jackson, those two sections are R3. So Phase 1's R3, Phase 2 is R2, and Phase 3 is R3.
Thank you. Other questions for staff? All right, then, we will proceed to public hearing. I think the first order of business will be to invite Ms. Kinney to present her proposal before, and then we will ask questions of that, and then also have public comment. So let's open the public hearing at 6:50. And with that, please identify yourself and your address, please.
Sure. I'm Vicki Kinney. I live in Fernmont Road in Lakeshore.
Very good. And thank you for being here tonight and requesting this public hearing. Could you explain aspects of your proposal to us?
Sure. I'm representing a recent 501c3 nonprofit, My Neighbor to Love Coalition, and we formed this nonprofit in August for the sole purpose of developing a supportive housing community. And as you heard, we'd like to do it in 3 phases. And the idea of supportive, what we would like to see is services on site, so mental health services, meeting rooms available for support services such as AA or Celebrate Recovery and that kind of thing, educational training, employment classes, maybe budgeting and financing classes. We'd like to collaborate with the other organizations and agencies throughout the city and work with them on any services that they can offer. And then we would supplement any kind of gaps that are in that plan. The housing part of the supportive housing would be, we'd like to build tiny homes, approximately 400 square feet. And we'd also like to maybe do some studio homes that are like 288 square feet, more studio for transitional living or for those that would prefer to have a smaller home and smaller rent costs. So the housing would be front porches. The idea is encouraging community and a more of a neighborly feel. And so, yeah, that's the idea. So to keep income, costs low for people that are wanting to rent them. The community part is probably the most important part. We're trying to develop an environment that is, a beautiful environment that's very park-like and very healing for a lot of people. Community gardens, a community center. So just more of a neighborhood feel. It would be gated and fenced. So guests could have to be checked in at the office if they want to visit. The residents would be responsible for their guests while they're visiting. Of course, there would be a handbook and certain rules to follow. So that's the basic idea.
Okay, thank you. Do you have questions for the applicant here? We've got a number of drawings presented and a general description of some potential asks of the city. We've got sort of a Q&A that you provided, and then some of the layouts there. The layouts may be a little bit finer detail than probably we want to speak to tonight, unless there are specific ideas that folks have on that may have bearing on developing a more full plan. So open to questions of the applicant.
Mr. Chair, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this forward. This is exciting stuff.
Yeah, it is.
I have a few questions that mostly stem from, I'm trying to just gain a grasp of what this looks like once it's up and running. So
Sure.
maybe you can just help me with a couple of things.
Sure.
So once it's up and functioning and running on its own, how is the property managed? Is there an overseeing entity that shovels snow and cuts grass and changes light bulbs and paints buildings? Can you give me an idea of just how this is managed, one of
Sure.
these is managed once it's
Sure.
done?
Our intent is to have at least one staff person on site, more of a property manager that, for check-in and making sure everything is completely maintained. We would like to, as much as possible, the residents that are there, we want them to feel like this is their neighborhood. So as much as possible, we want to help provide maybe supplemental income if we get enough support for this, to be able to hire that out. So somebody who's like, I would love to shovel walks, or I'd like to work in the gardens or do landscaping, that's a way that they could also work. Of course, that if there's not enough people that are interested in gardening or landscaping, then that would be hired out as part of our maintenance. So the nonprofits will make sure that the property is completely maintained.
Understood. Okay. I just have a couple other follow-ups. Is that
You bet.
okay? Can I rattle through?
Go ahead, Mr. Yeager.
My next question stems from, or question pertains to storage. So storage, barbecue grills, bicycles, shovels, all that, extra cars, all that kind of thing. Do we have any, can you give me can you help me understand what that might look like? Because the houses are perfectly charming, obviously,
Yeah.
right? But I'm curious about all the other stuff that goes
Right.
along with living.
We don't anticipate a lot of extra stuff, because those who would like to live in a tiny home, it's more about minimalistic living.
Okay.
So barbecue grills, that's part of the community. So we'll have a community park, playground, so grills will be available, picnic tables. There's not a need for a lot of that. Would, of course, have bicycle ramps or areas where people can park bikes. Parking is going to be, of course, a priority, because we want not only parking for residents who do have cars and a guest, but we'd like the community center to be, welcome for other people to come into. So
Gotcha.
if there's going to be a class and somebody wants to teach weaving or pottery or something like that, that we can invite people in the community. The idea is to make a community within the residents in the neighborhood, but also a community with other people, forming relationships with these people as well.
Got it. All right, my final question is, we've cited a neighborly approach with this project, certainly on the surface feels that way. Can you explain to me the need for the fence and the gate?
Really, it's more about protecting the neighbors inside. So some of these people that would be living here would likely be maybe on disability. Some people may have had a history of alcohol or drug abuse. So we're just wanting to be careful that they're not being preyed upon at the first of the month when they get their checks. So because some people can be taken advantage, there may be some people with developmental disabilities living on the
Understood.
property. So it's more about protecting them. And also making sure that we're not going to have an element of people that maybe want to do drug sales or whatnot, to be able to just kind of come and go freely as they want to. So we have a record of who's coming and going.
Understood. And
It's more about
there's an
protection.
attendant at this gate?
No, the residents will be coming, they'll have access to the gate themselves. Nobody else will when it comes to the actual property. The community center is accessible to the public to come and go, but as far as getting into the property, just the residents themselves will have access.
Understood.
And the idea, it's going to be a trust issue that when you come, if you've got a guest coming, they have to check in. Not that it's not going to ever get violated, but that's the idea.
Understood. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Yeager. Other questions for the applicant? Yes, Ms. Calros. There you are.
The whole supportive housing community, it's, I guess I've never heard of something like you're kind of proposing, but at least in Minnesota, I know there was a sketch in there from, I think it was North Carolina. I don't know if David provided that or you, or is there any other ones kind of in Minnesota or similar to this?
Not necessarily in Minnesota yet. I think they're starting to become more that way. We toured Envision in Minneapolis, and they're about to build their tiny home community. They're just they've got the land, and we've seen a prototype of their homes, and we met with them. So they're starting that. I think it's starting to take off. In more areas are starting to look into it. I know St. Cloud has an interest in what we're doing because they would like to see how this works to perhaps model. And that's what we're hoping for, is that if this does go through and we can develop this, that Brainerd can be kind of a beacon for the rest of the state. So other towns could come in and say, okay, we can manage this issue. This can be solved.
Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant?
I can clarify, though, in other states, there's several. So,
Okay.
but this is like first in Minnesota.
Thank you. I'll Google a little bit. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I can give you websites if you want.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kinney. Mr. Gorham?
Just to follow up on the gate idea, are they going to be around the houses are going to have the gate or the community? I'm just trying to figure out, and the reason I'm bringing up, I understand the idea of a gate. I'm just trying to imagine how it integrates into the neighborhood. I'm trying to imagine how somebody that lives in Tyrol Hills is going to walk over to Ace Hardware and maybe they take a shortcut through the neighborhood or things naturally people do.
Right.
Just trying to figure out kind of how the gate would fit into the community,
Okay.
the adjoining neighborhoods.
Sure. Of course, that because the property is divided by roads and streets, so there's, each of those phases would be separately fenced and gated.
Okay.
So the first phase, what we'd like to start, it's not going to be that site plan, though. The north of Jackson, that would be fenced in itself, so the residents in that area would have access to that gate. The road between there would be open for the public to walk through. And then likewise, between both second and third and third and fourth would be separately fenced and gated.
That helps, thank you.
Other questions for the applicant? Ms. Kinney, I have a number of questions regarding roads in your subdivision. The first is you're proposing parking on Jackson. I don't know that if that's simply for the exclusive use of the resident community, that probably would be privatizing a public
Right.
right-of-way. So I think that would need, if its intent is for that purpose, that probably has to be within your project boundary.
Yeah,
But
there's-
I'm imagining the community center is, say, you have a birthday party, or you have some other event that guests would come in, and that would be parking for them. Am I interpreting the use of that properly as
Yes.
the latter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. This particular site map is not the site map at all that we're going to be using. I just drew this up quickly as we had a meeting with the administrator and engineer and the planners, just to show them that with the property divided as it is, that we could still develop and still put in quite a few tiny homes. Obviously, the roads where they're at is not going to work. The parking along that, right now, it's just dirt there. So,
Right,
so
exactly.
it's not a road, and it doesn't go anywhere because Second Street, it has a dead end. So that's just something we were hoping that maybe we could negotiate with, so I drew it in just in case. But, yeah.
And a number of your roads that you've laid out here, with the exception of Phase 2, you have a lot of some blind ends here. I'm thinking that the city engineer would need to be consulted on that. David, am I correct, to allow the accessibility of emergency vehicles, fire and rescue, to be able to navigate through? I think we've got a loop, for example, in Phase
Right.
2, which works, but Phase 1 and
Right, and-
Phase 3 have blind ends. And
Right, that's not going to be the way it's going to be at all. That was really just written for the purposes of showing what the houses would look like to
Okay, so you're
scale on
gonna-
that property.
You'll want to coordinate with the city engineer on road
Yes.
design to make sure that's compliant.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
That would be good. And then, to the question, maybe this is a question later for staff here regarding what city requirements would be on improvements to Jackson and possibly Second, so we'll come to that separately. So I think those were those questions. Others, Mr. Erickson?
Yeah, can you perhaps educate me on kind of the supportive housing concept? When I read in here the month-to-month lease, does that play into that supportive housing concept? Because when I'm thinking about that, I would think that the responsibility and the commitment of a longer term would be perhaps more helpful or more,
Certainly.
and maybe provide more stability for these individuals, but
Right.
what's your
The reason-
rationale behind that?
Sure. The residents that come here and want to be part of the community and want to live there can live here forever. So that's the idea. We want this to be permanent housing for them, but there may be those resident here and there that maybe, based on by their action, or maybe they decide that they don't want to follow the handbook or follow the rules that the community has developed for them. And so then we just have an option of like, okay, we'll give you a chance, but if it seems like consistent, we're not tied to a lease. So it's more about being able to release people from the community and finding other housing for them if they're not cooperative. But the idea is for permanent housing for those that want to live here permanently. That's our goal. But it's more of a protection if we do have to remove somebody. Okay.
Other questions? Ms. Kinney, I think your Phase 3, and quite frankly, Phase 1 sit on what is currently an R3 zoning district, which allows for multifamily units, triplexes, quads, and condominiums or apartments and things like that. So, in our Crow Wing County housing study, the value of affordable housing and the amount of affordable housing, and I've spoken to this before in other commission meetings, this property has some very unique and important attributes for being able to meet a lot of the goals in our Crow Wing County workforce housing study. And it seems like tiny houses on places that allow a much higher density, seems like it's a missed opportunity for meeting the goals of our comp plan. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have kind of a different opinion as far as value in neighborhoods. I prefer homes over apartment buildings and large parking lots. I just feel like it creates a better environment, more neighborly feel. I feel like people kind of take a little bit more ownership. So personally, yes, I can understand there's a huge housing need in Brainerd. And it sounds like from what I read in the comprehensive plan, 13 years, we need, over, 4,500 more homes. So I can understand that the need to want to pack as many people in there as possible. However, I just don't feel it's the best way for housing for a lot of people. For some people, it's great, but for people that are, especially the people that we're working with, apartment living can be very isolating. And so we're looking to really develop more of neighborhoods, family-like type neighborhoods. So it's just a preference. We would prefer to use the tiny homes instead of large homes and put as many as we can, but because we're servicing individuals, families, couples.
The Phase 3 area has got existing quadruplex on the northwest corner along Jackson and Northwest 4th Street, and some efficiency units on the southwest corner of that same block.
Yeah.
We've looked at some proposals that have come before this board for redeveloping parts of our downtown area with very, attractive and functional housing apartments and stuff. And it seems to me that particular spot at least allows itself to that sort of design a little bit more. And it seems like a missed opportunity and a difficult thing for me to get comfortable with giving up the amount of potential housing there on that block in particular that's very consistent with what's around it. So I would be suggesting that as you go back from today's meeting that you think a bit about, certainly for that block, maybe ways of trying to move towards something that accommodates more density. And I understand the point that you're making. I think, the layout that you have for your Phase 2 seems to provide a nice transition from neighboring property to the east. You transition to a little higher density, and then this Phase 3 seems to be appropriate for the surrounding development and the complementary housing, residential housing across Northwest 4th from there. So I'd ask you to think a little bit more about how to maybe accommodate a higher density on that spot. Again, this is a conceptual plan. You've thrown some general comments out there. Well, maybe we can have 17 housing units on that block, but that block could conceivably, with additions of quads with good green space around them and something like the Autumn Glen apartments, like along the Paul Bunyan Trail, or what we've seen proposed for downtown Brainerd in previous meetings. You take a combination of those, and you could move that up to almost 60 or plus housing units that all would be affordable and would meet the goals of the Crow Wing County Workforce Housing Plan, would meet your goals of affordable housing, and probably can get you closer to being able to build these at an affordable price. When you look at the housing study, I think they're saying $37,000 is a median household income for the city of Brainerd. That's $13,000 a year if you want to not get upside down on how much money you're putting into housing.
Yeah.
So that's, when you think of rent or you think about a mortgage payment, that's not a lot to work with, so.
Well, I definitely appreciate the feedback. I know in Phase 3, our intent or our hope was to be able to build homes for home ownership, and so that would be kind of separate from the supportive housing, but it's certainly something to look into. I don't know that our nonprofit would have the budget to build apartment complexes as we're focusing more on the supportive housing, but that might be something that can be explored perhaps with somebody else that might be having interest.
Or an opportunity for additional partnerships to
Yes,
to achieve
exactly.
an important goal.
Yeah, I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that. Thank you.
Other questions? All righty. Well, Ms. Kenny, thank you, and if
Thank
you
you.
can please hang tight, there may be some follow-up conversations here, so
That sounds great.
thanks for your
I do have one
presentation.
other
And by the
question.
way, welcome back.
Oh,
So I think you spoke
Thank
with us,
you.
what, in October?
Yes, it was, yeah.
So welcome back.
can I like throw out something that's not related, just to plant a
Sure.
seed? Okay. Well, just a thought. I would love to see that Whiskey Creek is so cute and charming. I would just plant a seed. That would be a really nice little area for a city park. A public park with maybe a bike trail that can kind of route it away from that busy road on Fourth and around that roundabout to cut across and go over that little bridge and connect up towards Beaver Dam. Just a suggestion that would be kind of a nice little spot to develop for the public. So
And you speak to my heart on that, and I shared that vision. I shared that vision with you. But recently, those tax forfeit parcels were actually sold and are under private ownership. So that
okay.
is an unfortunate. It was fortunate that someone has a lovely piece of property along the river there, but
Yeah.
that ability to be able to connect up on the Beaver
Can't do
Dam
that
is no
there.
longer an option. So,
I'll have to
but
be-
I share that vision with you. It's a lovely spot.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, at this point, I think I'd like to hear from individuals that would care to speak to this project. Is there anyone that would care to speak to this project? Yes, please come up to the podium, state your name and address, and direct your comments and questions to me. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, Chair. Sheila Haverkamp. I actually reside in Baxter, but own Burlington Recovery Homes with my husband and my son. And have spent, I don't know if it's been 2 or 3 meetings and several hours with Vicki, talking about her concepts and what we do and how that harmony might exist and yet not compete with each other, but support each other and the people in our community. And when Vicki called me, I was actually taken back because of this site, because when we had talked at other times, there were other parcels and sites that she was working on. But when she called and said this was the site that she now had a purchase agreement on, and she wanted to give us heads up because of our Tyrell Hills neighbors. And so I'm having a couple of thoughts. I've contemplated it deeply. I wish Vicki could have been here last night and her team for the Brainerd City Council meeting when there was open forum and the Tyrell Hills neighborhood came out, at least several of them, very, very concerned about the type of individuals that we have in the neighborhood because of our sober homes and how they don't necessarily always feel safe. Of course, we totally disagree with them, just like I know Vicki would as well. But I do think that this project and the Tyrell Hills neighborhood are going to somehow have to find this balance so that there's harmony and peace in our community and good neighbors and goodwill and good friendship. When I looked at Vicki's plan and studied it in depth, and then studied the planning and zoning maps, and then I went back to my Bladek years because I worked with Bladek for over 30 years in economic development. And of course, this site has always amazed me. I spent hours studying this site in great depth because I've always thought it's probably one of the better untapped sites that exist in the city of Brainerd for some really unique and opportune developments. I not only looked at the Gustafson or Mr. Lake's property, but also all the right-of-way and the city-owned land. And when you put it all together, this 22-acre plus site was included in several proposals to developers to say, would you ever consider doing a massive development for our community on this site? So now when it gets broken down into a smaller section, I started thinking about it a little differently, obviously. But one of my initial thoughts is it would appear to me, the Tyrell Hills neighborhood is the single-family development. And if Phase 3 potentially a single-family development, that you'd almost flip the cottage teeny homes to more along the roadway and by that apartment complex that already exists. And and have the larger single-family homes next to Tyrol. So you'd have Tyrol, single-family homes, these single-family homes, to tiny homes, to Southwest Fourth, and then into the business district. I don't know, that's the way my mind kind of contemplated the development, and if Vicki is reconsidering it based on the feedback everybody's giving, just a thought I would have. What else did I write down? The other thing that I just, only because I was at the meeting last night, and it was an hour-plus meeting of deep conversation about, people in recovery, and mental health, drug addictions, alcoholism, and how that clientele or resident works in harmony with other residential communities. I contemplated the letter that Vicki sent out to the Tyrol Hills neighborhood, and some of the wording that was used compared to how some of the questions that were answered that Vicki put together for the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I think it would be helpful at some point that a more in-depth informational packet go to the neighborhood so that those conversations can occur in advance and we work through some positive direction for all of us. This development, our sober homes, and the community as a whole, and the city. So I think that's all I would have. Unless somebody has more questions for me.
Thank you, Ms. Haverkamp.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would care to speak to the proposal or the concept plan, that's before us tonight? Anyone else care to speak to the proposal? And last time, anyone here wish to speak to the housing proposal before us? Okay, well, I'm going to turn to staff maybe at this moment in time. David, I had an open question about roads for Senator Sandy. I like that. And Chief Engineer Sandy.
President.
who is about to get placed in office against his will, perhaps, or without his knowledge. What would be the city requirements for Jackson, which at that point where it's gated at the intersection of Northwest Third and east to the river? As if this property's developed, it looks like, the proposed access to the north parcel there, Phase 1, is to the east of that intersection or the existing improved road. So what would the city be required to do there, or what would Mr. Sandy possibly think?
So myself, Engineer Sandy, Administrator Bergman did have a chance in December to sit down with Ms. Kinney and kind of go over her concept plan. And that is public right of way. It would need to be improved per our code, would require improvement. Engineer Sandy did express some reluctance as part of this plan, likely what I think Ms. Kinney would desire, and I think she made mention of it in the Q&A piece that she had in the packet, is having maybe that vacated. Engineer Sandy has expressed some reluctance to support a vacation of that section of road. Mainly being is if you actually look at James, I don't know if you can bring up the actual GIS map of this area. There is a very large retention pond right at the bottom of Northwest 2nd. It's one of the few retention ponds the city has that actually has ability to potentially be expanded in the future. Most other retention ponds don't have that ability. And then when we look at any future development of the site, that retention pond comes into play. So he has expressed some reluctance to vacate that section that roughly between Northwest 3rd and Northwest 2nd for access reasons. When they do work on that retention pond right now, that is how they access the pond, is through that. It's easier to access it that way than coming down Northwest 2nd is not as easy as an access. So he has expressed concern there. He has expressed that, you know, if you look at this GIS map, how it is now, there would need to be some vacations there's some existing platted alleyways. You know, if this development would go through, he hasn't had any concern about vacating those alleyways because they wouldn't be needed. However, that section of Jackson Street, he does have some concerns about completely vacating that piece.
Thank you. And if improvements are made there, how would those be assessed?
Generally, how this would work in this situation where it's currently on an improved road, the first time it is improved, it is assessed, I believe it's 100% to the property owners. I would have to confirm that with him, though. I don't know exactly all the assessment process, but most of the time, especially when it comes to a development, if it's related specifically to a development, normally there's 100% responsibility of the developer.
And Ms. Kinney is proposing to connect the Phase 2 development to Third and Jackson, or to Jackson, excuse me, to Jackson, under the conceptual plan. Would that drive any required improvements to Northwest Second? Or would that require connections to Jackson, which currently it ends in a cul-de-sac, and another stormwater pond is in that general vicinity, probably again on the north side of Jackson there, I think.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, based on this, again, the high-level discussions we had with Ms. Kinney, based off of this site plan, Engineer Sandy didn't express any need, at least at that time, of needing a connection between the two, that it, you know, was kind of okay if it dead-ended. Obviously, as I think it was you questioned earlier, you know, any actual development, any actual roadways, driveways would have to meet standards for emergency vehicles egress. For emergency vehicles, we would have to, when we got, if this progressed to an actual development stage, we would have to look at that. The police chief would have to look at that. The fire chief would also have to look at that to make sure it is adequate for emergency vehicles to get in and out. And at that point, they might determine whether or not essentially the full loop would have to be created from Jackson all the way over to Northwest Second.
Thank you. So any other questions of staff or points of discussion here on this before us? I think at this point, we'll close the public hearing at 7:23 and then and go to commission discussion here. Thoughts on what we've heard today?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Gorham.
Well, I appreciate where you're coming from, Commissioner Duval, on the idea of, you know, the need for housing, the need for, that this is a site that we could look at for a very dense housing. I can appreciate that. I also can remember that this site was proposed for mini storage at one point, not too long ago. And so I see an improvement there. Maybe we need to look at this as a bird in the hand versus one bird in the hand versus two in the bush, right? That this is something that's tangible, not on the table yet, but, you know, it's coming together, as opposed to waiting for somebody to come, a private developer to come along and build, you know, high-density housing, which may or may not happen. And I kind of gathered from Sheila's comments that perhaps people have been asked to look at this, and they haven't. They've declined, at least in the past, to do this. So I'm generally inclined to liking this proposal. I think we have to understand, I don't think the plan we have in front of us right now, I can see a final plan looking very different. Let me put it that way. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Gorham. Other comments or discussion? Mr. Erickson.
I'll chime in. I, too, kind of share the concern of giving up the opportunity of that spot to a less dense use. I did like your concept of kind of the fourplex and a couple, you know, higher density units. So I think there's some potential there. I do remember when it was proposed as a storage unit, so I agree that there is improvement there. And then the other thing that's of concern is the harmony with the neighbors, as Ms. Haverkamp brought up. That's a That's an open concern, as you've heard from, the meeting we had last night. However, I agree that maybe the final proposal does look different, from this, so. I just wanted to share a few concerns that were on my mind.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. Yes, Mr.
Mr.
Yeager.
Chair, please, thank you. Well, in an effort to give as good information as possible, because I know when this is brought forward, what the developer is looking for is good, clean information coming back at the potential of this project moving forward. So I'm going to try and be as clean and concise about it as I can. And I'd first like to say that I can absolutely appreciate and sympathize and want to foster and help nurture anybody who brings forth a project of this type. There's a need in the community, there's nobility in this work, and I absolutely want to support that any way possible. I'm going to tell you just kind of where I'm at on this just real quickly here. I think this is an okay fit for this area, not particularly great. I also have the concern with the higher density. I believe that we are going to continue to see people trying to move to this area in the next decade, and I think there's going to be more and more opportunities coming in front of us for higher density units. High density units means lower cost dwellings, and I think that direction alone has me still leaning towards a higher density use on this parcel. The fence may or may not be a deal breaker, but right now it feels like a deal breaker to me. I just cannot wrap my head around how a fenced, gated community in what's supposed to be a neighborhood does not send sends any message other than someone either belongs in and somebody else belongs out. So the fence alone to me is a factor when building neighborhoods. Okay. I also have an issue with the harmony with the neighborhoods. I mean, we all know the narrative that's going on right now, guys, right? So it's a concern. We're all talking about it. I think that's good, but that's on my mind, right? So that's where I am with that. And the only other thing I will say is that I've learned a long time ago that the word phase can also mean perpetually unfinished. So that is also a concern. I would, if somebody was bringing a plan to me with a project like this, I would like to see the money, the architecture, the landscaping, the water runoff, all of those pieces in place, ready to go in one motion to a completed project before I said, let's go. That's my personal opinion. So for that, I would sum it up and say I'm in a position or a temperature of about lukewarm on this, and I'll pass it along.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Mr. Calvers.
Thank you. Kind of like I mentioned before, it's a really cool concept. I'd never really heard of it, and there isn't one currently in Minnesota. There may be some in the works, and it's unique that Brainerd could be one of the first. That's kind of what stuck out in my mind. It is hard to imagine it, I guess, as the fence has been brought up. I drive my daughter to daycare every day that way, and so I know what it looks like when it's bare with just trees and stuff there, and so to picture some sort of fence is a little bit weird, so it'd be cool to see a drop and an actual proposal and such. That would help a lot. Affordable housing, that's a huge need. This would provide a big need for a lot of people that are struggling in the community. With that said, density concern, if there was some sort of apartment complex, could it reach more people? That'd be one thing. But yeah, just super cool concept. I was sitting here Googling a couple that I could find online, and yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the one in Minneapolis looks like, and where it goes from here, I'm not sure, but it's a really cool idea.
Thank you, Mr. Calvers. Others? Ms. Woodward.
Yes, I know there are concerns about a fenced area. I don't believe in Brainerd we have enough secure areas. We have a lot of people who have been the victims of domestic abuse or other situations where they're looking for somewhere safe and secure, and there really aren't a lot of places. The residents over in the Franklin Arts Center have a very unique living opportunity there where only the residents have keys in and out of there. and the general population does not have access in any way to that building, there are very few places like that, and there are even fewer places where you can have a house or some sort of an independent living situation where there isn't someone directly on the other side of the wall. So to see some sort of a small area, even if it were to be, say, where Phase 3 is located, and that's where the tiny home community went in, to have that one small section that is actually a fenced-in area that's gated and provides a secure living place for people who require that for their safety. That would be an interesting and neat thing to see in our community. And then that leaves the other phases, the other spots of the plan open for either single-family homes or more dense housing.
Thank you, Ms. Woodward. I've got, I'm intrigued by tiny homes as a means of affordability, as a means of addressing sort of what is a change from the ginormous house lifestyles to something now more modest. It's a pretty radical shift. So I'm intrigued by that quite a bit. The art of this proposal is going to be the marriage of tiny homes and sort of the intended clientele that's been brought here. So I think that's going to be a lot of work, Ms. Kinney, for you to be able to navigate that, and that harmony of the neighborhood is a great phrase to try and be able to think through that. So thank you for bringing that language. I think that's a good way to package it. So we can think about, the next level of this, sort of that development plan will bring us, I think, some clearer pictures like Mr. Yeager's asking for. I think now we're going to get down to the stuff that now I can begin to get my arms around this, and now we can start saying, does this fit more closely? Fences have got to go, landscaping here, sort of those details. So that, when we get to that phase, I would worry too about developing phases and then this dying out. And is this too big a project? And maybe choosing parts of this to maybe say this is the piece rather than all three of these separate geographies, the north of Jackson, the second and third, and then the third and fourth. You might think of that. I hadn't heard what the thoughts were and the plans were. Outlot C of Tyrol Hills along the river is pretty much floodplain, so I don't know what plans. I did not hear that, and I apologize for not asking questions, but that will be no doubt revealed in a future meeting before the commission. But more clearly understanding what the intentions would be for Outlot C, given that that's floodplain, that's not going to allow you infrastructure development in there, things like that. So I think those are generally maybe that's the general temperature of the commission. So with that, I'm maybe looking to try and bundle some recommendations to City Council on this particular proposal. I think what I heard is the focusing on the harmony piece, and the fence. I've heard pro and cons on that, and that may still be a little bit closer to the ground than we need at this stage for being able to come back. But I think it's an important signal to the applicant to think a bit more about how you manage that flow of people in and out of the subdivision. And then the issue of density, thinking about how you manage the density there. Again, that transitioning and how you think about it. I've got my ideas about that. We've had testimony of other ways of thinking about it as well. So how you think about transitioning from the Tyrol Hills to the east over to the more business residential, commercial residential stuff that's happening on the west side of Northwest Fourth. So there's a natural progression, it seems like, and the current zoning follows that trend. And so thinking about how you might manage the density to make sure that we're not surrendering potential housing opportunity on what is a pretty darn valuable asset here in the city of Brainerd, with a lot of infrastructure right at the curb already in place. So this has low development potential as far as infrastructure costs. And then sort of the marketing questions here as well about, you know, can these houses be built in a cost-effective way when, you know, if it's a tiny house, you still have to run sewer, water, electric to it, you know, and if they're duplexes or multiplexes, you run that water, sewer, and electricity one time and then you divide it. So how you put these things together will help you manage the costs. If you put two buildings together, that's two sides that you don't have to side with the exterior sheathing and so forth. So issues to think about, and you've probably explored the marketing here, but those are things that may drive the costs up and challenge you to be able to make affordable housing that someone that can only afford to spend $13,000 a year of their household income on housing is going to be able to fit in that neighborhood. That's the sweet spot and up for housing in the housing study. So, again, the three issues I'm hearing: harmony in the neighborhood, sort of the fencing issues, and density. Mr. Erickson.
So just to those points, I agree. Those are kind of the three things that we're hearing. And just from a council perspective, my impression is that council would have concerns over the density as well. And then as far as our recommendation to council, I agree about identifying the disunity or the harmony as an issue, but I'm not sure what is part of the recommendation to council, you know, to solve that harmony thing. I'm not sure. We'll have to be careful how we word that as far as, you know, because the council's well aware of the issue. In one case, you know, as we well know, we're limited in what actions we can take. So just identifying it, but I'm not sure what recommendations we can make as far as that, addressing that harmony to council.
Do we have thoughts on how that might be addressed, or how we might refine that recommendation to council? So it's actionable. I mean, I think that's what you're asking.
Yes, that's a
Your-
very
your
good way to
point
put
is,
it.
How do I actionize?
I've got concept stuff, but I don't have an actionable
Yeah.
stuff, you know?
Just as, Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Erickson.
as Commissioner Yeager said, just like developers like clear recommendations, so does council, but how do you make that actionable? That's a tough one. So, and maybe we, in our recommendation, we include these three items with the neighborhood harmony being identified as a concern.
Well, I think there is a potential way to talk about the neighborhood harmony, and that is we ask the applicant, who is also privy to this information and also knows the dialogue that's being bantered around, to be a participant in potential solutions as well. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us as City Council, Planning Commission, and the applicant to come up with a potential process that might work for everyone. So I would say that while we don't have the answers right now, Tad, that we're going to hope that the applicant comes forth knowing that both Planning Commission and City Council are going to be very sensitive to the whole neighborhood harmony aspect, to bring forward something that allows us to understand that you're grasping that, and that there's something that's going to help us to allow that. That's the only thing I can say right now.
Ms. Kinney, please come up. Yeah.
I just had one question. I didn't know that there was a meeting last night. I don't keep up with things, so sorry I didn't attend. So I didn't get to hear from the neighbors. I've only have gotten 2 phone calls, so I'm just curious, have you gotten any response about this project? because I've just had two, and they were pretty good conversations, but that's why I included that question answered, because I wanted to make sure that, in case they didn't come here, that their questions and the concerns were heard. So that's why I included that. But I was just curious if you had gotten any more calls or any concerns, because
And Director Chansky, have you received any feedback on this public notice?
We have not.
There's that answer. So perhaps the expectation, maybe the action is that there's an expectation. If that's workable. Yep. Mr. Gorham, please.
Is there a way we can make a recommendation with concerns? You know, and I don't, you know, not a halfway recommendation, but saying this is a worthy idea, but the concerns are unanswered at this point. That's not a very articulate way to put it, but that's what I'm trying to say. Is that, yeah, we're not saying no to the concept, but we're also saying we just don't know enough. Too many questions.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Director Chansky, please.
To Commissioner Gorham's comment, I think that's exactly something the commission can do tonight. Again, part of the concept, as I read early on, you're not really giving a yes or a no tonight. It's more of pretty much what Commissioner Gorham said. You know, in general, it does sound like there is some support for this idea, but there are concerns. There are some questions that remain unanswered. With that, so in your recommendation, you know, again, it's not a requirement, it's a recommendation. Per the code, the next step for Ms. Kenny would be the development stage plan. Granted, that stage of the plan would require actual development plans, you know, a proposed plat, you know, elevations, storm work, all of that you would see, like, for example, that you saw when Country Manor came before you last year. All of those development type documents would have to come. A recommendation you could be making to the council is that you would maybe potentially like to see, you know, maybe an intermediary step. You know, you can't necessarily require her to come back prior to the development stage plan, but maybe you are encouraging her to come back with more. That is a recommendation you can make if you would like. Again, trying to help the commission put together maybe what you're looking at as to help you and potentially the city council kind of wrap your mind around this project. Again, the idea here to provide direction to the applicant prior to those serious investments being made, which would be that next step.
Mr. Chair? if I-
Yes, Ms. Woodward.
I agree with Mr. Chansky, and I know that there is a set of development stages, and the next stage would be the development plans. But that is how we typically work with the large developers who come in and people who are established in this. What we're entertaining here is someone who has not done a project like this before, and what we have been trying to encourage in our community is a little out-of-the-box thinking. And I think we're getting that. And by adding that intermediate step and saying, come back again with the next step before we go to this, take this advice, run through it again, take some of the community feedback, run through it again, bring it back another time and run through it again, because we all want to work on this. We all want to see this come to fruition and something that's going to be really good for our community. There isn't anybody who wants to say no to this.
And I will add, if I may, Mr. Chair, to what Commissioner Woodward just said again, because once you do get to the development stage plan, and if a development stage plan is submitted, the recommendation is yes or no. So that's kind of maybe, as you're considering this, is once you get to that development stage plan per the city code, per state statute, the recommendation and then action by the city council has to be yes or no.
You know, I think from a process perspective, so one option I'm hearing, Director Chansky, is that we could request some further information from the applicant before we make a final recommendation to city council. To say on the concept plan, am I hearing you correctly?
What I was saying more of, this will go to the city council, but part of your recommendations to the council is saying, we support this, we have some concerns, and we are asking the applicant to come back with maybe with some answers to our concerns prior to submitting for the development stage plan.
You know, I think, you know, one of the details that would be helpful in that way, that hits on some of the points that we're talking about, is some of the codicils, the operating aspects of the plat, right? What are the guidelines or the covenants that are going to travel with that, to get at fencing, get at maintenance of the property, you know, and it might be helpful to see sort of a sketch of that to follow up before they dive deep into the formal design work as one option. Other thoughts? Well, yes, Mr. Gorham.
My only thought is that I'm going back to school, and the grades used to get, incomplete. We can say, you're not saying no, you're not saying yes, you say a little bit further.
Yep. And that, I think, is the point of this. This
Yeah.
step is to get
Yeah.
sort of, here's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
You know, getting the idea kicked around a little bit by the commission and by the request of the applicants, some public feedback. Now I'm gonna go back and sharpen the pencil, right? And not spend a lot of money on something that's way out in left field that just doesn't have a chance, and or burns on the public conflict fire. So I think this is where we are, and I think we've got something that, as I read the language of the commission, there's interest. There's interest in this idea. There's we're excited about the possibilities of having development in this direction, and we just need to see a little bit more of the details now at this point. Am I sensing that there's general support for the concept with details to follow? Is that fair? Is that a fair read of the commission? Okay, Mr. Erickson?
And going back to the process, so do we have to make a recommendation to council tonight? Given that it's
Is there a clock running on this one?
Sorry, given that we do, how does that intermediary step then? Part of the recommendation is to, one, we express our concerns over A, B, and C, and then two, part of that recommendation is this intermediary step of gathering more information.
Correct. I think that's the way it would be. It's, again, general support. Here are our main concerns we'd like to have answers for. And therefore, we are requesting the applicant come back with some of, maybe further drawing out some of these concepts that were discussed tonight. I do think, again, the council does need to be seeing this, hearing this recommendation. I think it's also important for the council to see this proposal as you have seen it tonight. So then if they have any further comments, concerns, questions, they can potentially get answered when the applicant comes back to you.
So I'm looking for see if we can try and give voice to a motion here, a motion to motion in general support of the concept proposal, and requesting that the applicant come back to the planning commission prior to the development plan phase. That's what I'm feeling the guts of the motion is. And what are the things that we want to see? To me, one of those would be covenants. Are there other things that, would there be some product from maybe outreach to the neighborhood that gets at the harmony piece? Is that maybe a... Body language is great on that one.
Really
Well, Mr. Chair, the difficulty is we can't make harmony. That's the whole trick with the harmony thing. We can't make harmony.
Can't, but what is the effort to,
Include more feedback,
yeah,
grasping. but
something,
yeah.
something that we can define. I'm sorry, Mr. Erickson.
Yeah, so I was gonna make the same point, and that was kind of what I was saying with that, being careful with that harmony piece as we make a recommendation to council. We can't make the harmony, so I mean, how do you make that part of the recommendation? So, well put. And then also, I mean, you know, at what degree we have to balance, what degree do we take this application at its face regardless of surrounding properties? You know, this is what's being proposed for this property. Yes, we do have to consider the surrounding areas, so we have to balance that concern too. But maybe that is a good, somebody mentioned getting feedback from, you know, we do that oftentimes with like a 300-foot radius or whatever, as far as getting notices sent out and, so I think that would be
You know,
a
Mr.
good part
Chair,
of that.
if I may, I think it was either Commissioner Gorman or Commissioner Yeager, you just pointed out, again, I understand we're trying to give some action to the applicant, but part of it could be just applicant of, maybe just look at the harmony piece, and maybe the applicant comes back with you with something, you know.
Say that again,
versus
please, David, I'm having a hard time
Trying
hearing.
to, you know, maybe put, again, what Commissioner Yeager talked about is, you can mention that harmony piece and just ask the applicant to maybe look further into it, and then the applicant can come back with whatever they feel seem to be appropriate, versus telling them exactly what you want to see. Because again, I think with the harmony piece, from what I've been hearing, I think there's a lot of different ways you can play with harmony. Again, we can't change people, or again, make harmony, but there's a lot of different ways that harmony works. Harmony works with landscaping, harmony works with screening and things like that. Harmony can mean a lot of different things and can be addressed a lot of different ways. So I think maybe this point is encouraging the applicant to look at those factors.
Mr. Gorham, I'm going to let you finish your, and I apologize, but there was an order issue here, but go, please.
No worries, this is actually a different thought. Now, this may be out there, but perhaps is the kindest thing to not recommend it and ask that it be resubmitted? Would that actually be mechanically the better way to do it?
Yeah, no, I was kind of going towards the direction of tabling pending further information, but I'm not sure the logistics of moving this along versus tabling it, whether we're able to, because it sounds like we're all grasping for more information. And I think we've given pretty good direction to the applicant with what we're after. So, Mr. Chansky, maybe you can shed a little light on whether or not we could just table this pending further information before we make a recommendation to the city council.
I will say I do have a little bit of concerns tabling it, again, just of the time lapse. You know, I think the applicant has heard a lot of your concerns. I understand, again, trying to formulate a specific motion. I do think it could just be as simple tonight of just making that, to keep the process moving, to get on to the city council so they can do the review. I'm just making that motion of, you know, telling the council that you have general support. You know, you have some concerns regarding, harmony of existing neighborhood, density, and fencing that you would like the applicant to look into and bring back to the planning commission for consideration prior to proceeding to the development stage plan.
Mr. Gorham, I see in your hand that.
Yeah, so what if we broke it down to this? We do a recommendation, but we cite three concerns: harmony, density, and details of site plan. Does that get at things? Am I missing something there? I'm not bringing up fencing, I'm trying to be a little more general and say details of the site plan needs to be fleshed out more.
I think the fiscal aspect needs to be looked at also. How much of this project is going to take place in one way, in the first initial wave? The level of completedness in the phasing aspect, I think, should be a critical part of that.
Mr. Chair, I would be quite willing to add that.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Yeager, some kind of bouncing back.
I didn't know you had a motion going there, so.
No, I'm trying to make a motion. I'm trying
Okay.
to work at a motion. And I'm quite willing to add to the motion as we go here. So maybe we may make the motion with 4 things. I'm just trying to get us to our next step. That's all I'm trying to do.
So things that sort of were missing, and I'm looking for that financial piece, and it may not be in the.
Our code?
Yeah, in the concept plan, we do have a request under, section 1111B, 9 for covenants. So that's something that, we didn't have here that would be helpful. But David, am I correct that the financial proof of being able to pull this off is a later stage? You're showing the financials, trying to recall from the example of the development over off of Beaver Dam.
I could rephrase the financial into completion dates.
Completion dates, when you'd expect that phase to
Yep.
be done. That's fair.
Realistic timetable?
Absolutely, yep.
Which is, Mr. Chair, is in there under 1111A, does talk about staging and time of development.
1111A?
Yep. 1111A5, staging and time schedule of development. So I do think that is a reasonable thing to request.
Okay, so that's a missing piece that would help us think about a little bit of the open questions on that. Okay. So that's, governance are 1111. Yeah. So those are things that we could specifically point to that would help us. These are points that we've struggling with at the moment, saying, boy, wouldn't it be nice to know? So a couple of pieces in the packet that is reasonable to ask them to come back following some sort of city council action and report to us before advancing to the development stage plan, where now we're spending bucks on more design details and things like that. I think we're comfortable anchoring on that. Is there an anchor to the harmony piece there at all? And again, what we're not, I think what we would be asking for is some sort of report back on an effort to say how they would address the issues of harmony that came up in the public testimony and in the deliberation of the commission. I think that's kind of what you're at, to say, how do we come forward? These are the efforts that I've made. In our initial packet, the applicant has reported out, here's sort of the feedback I heard based on an initial outreach to the Tyrell Hills neighborhood, or at least to adjoining properties. I don't know if it was the entire neighborhood or not, but Mr. Erickson.
Well, I was just going to say, too, I know there was that initial effort made, but I think someone mentioned, Sheila, you mentioned kind of a broader packet of information about the concept, too. So maybe something along those lines, however you wanted to phrase that, or I think that was kind of where you're going, more of an informational packet almost, to supplement what was already done. That provides a little bit more of an anchor to that harmony recommendation.
Any other thoughts? Okay, can we put this into a motion? So what I'm hearing is that the council is recommending interim approval of the,
Commission.
excuse me, to the council.
Okay, thank you.
Right, yeah, let's not get any more responsibilities than we already have.
Mr. Chair.
Interim
just-
approval of the general concept plan. Mr. Jansky, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah,
Chansky.
Mr.
I think,
Jansky.
I think we want to avoid the word approval,
I agree.
Okay,
Consideration?
or support.
there you go. Thank you. We struggle on this one. So interim support for the general concept plan with concerns, and we're requesting that the applicant come back to the commission prior to moving to the development plan and bring back details of covenants.
I'm just going to jump in, but by covenants, are you talking about the site plan?
No, the covenants themselves. The site plan is, so the site plan is the drawings that we've had at the moment.
Yeah.
The next level of the development plan gets at a more refined site plan.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We need a better site plan.
at the next
The
phase.
next step, yeah, we're requesting a better site plan. I think when you bring in the word covenant, to me, I get
The
confused.
covenants are getting at intent of any restricted covenants that are recorded with the property to include, how you manage the buildings and take care of the grounds, and some of the questions, the overall management of that, and who's responsible for what, and such. I'm not sure, it would be premature in my mind that we ask for a more refined site plan at this stage. That's what the next development stage is for, is to now take this feedback and organize something that they can actually build based on what the planning commission and the city council are saying we can likely build, or approve, we can likely approve here at this. David, do you have comments on that, or is that generally what we should be expecting is the next step gives us the details of the plan, the site plan?
So the development stage plan should be the site plan. So if you would, you can request maybe another, a next level if you would like. Again, when we get to the development stage plan, that really needs to be a completed proposed development. So if you have concerns about the site plan itself, then I would recommend that the applicant come back with maybe a more refined site plan. If I don't have concerns about the site plan, then. But again, that development stage itself really is kind of, when they submit that, it's going to be, full plats, full site plans, elevations, all of that will be part of that development stage plan.
All right, thank you for that. So it is reasonable then, back to Commissioner Gorham's point, to say, bring us a better drawing. It's not to the level of the final, but it gets us a little clearer. Maybe that's the way you depict how you're gonna handle density on the site.
Although the density is also its own standalone item here, too. We're talking about land use in terms of, community land use.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Erickson, thank you.
I think when you use the term covenants, are you talking about the nonprofit's kind of operational guidelines, how they're going to operate within the, or are you talking more like covenants as far as like what, on the deed, like what runs with the land?
That's the piece that's asked for in this
Okay,
concept phase of the plan that we haven't really seen.
okay. I just wanted to make sure that, because that's the way I was initially interpreting it, was about that. And I thought maybe you had a different use of the term.
And certainly, we can talk about maybe those operational plans of how they would operate it from a property management perspective, which that's hinted at some of the materials about if folks fall out of the alignment with the operating guidelines, that's the purpose for the short-term leases and so forth.
And honestly, addressing that might help with the harmony and the communication with the neighborhood as well, how that's going to be handled.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ms. Woodward?
for the sake of our applicant, I'm thinking perhaps we just simplify this for her, and we say, perhaps to the council, that we are offering interim support of the plans in a preliminary stage, and we ask that they come back to the planning commission prior to the development stage, and we make a recommendation to the applicant to bring these things back to us, but we try to keep the motion a little more simple. I'm losing track of all of the different, how are we going to word things and what are we planning out here? And it kind of feels like we're starting to step into the territory of doing some of her planning for her.
Yeah, and thank you for that, and I appreciate the simplifying the motions. I think we do need to provide some guidance to the applicant on what we want to bring back, and I think that's kind of what we're grinding at the moment, is coming back to us with these things, and that I think might be helpful to the council as well, to say we're this is the basis for some of the interim support with some concerns. And these are sort of the areas we've asked the applicant to come back, and council may either say, yeah, good idea, or they may say, yeah, that's probably more than we need to know, we're ready to go. I don't know, Tad, how you would feel at the council level about.
Okay, you put it was good, you know, if we, you know, in our recommendation, address several of the issues, what we've asked the applicant to come back with, that way council can then know what issues we brought up, and then evaluate how the applicant addressed those issues. Would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Gorham.
I'm going to make a motion. And
Perfect.
If it dies, it dies. If it doesn't, we'll go on. The motion to the city council is that we have support for the concept. We ask that that the developer revisits this with us again, and we look forward to the feedback of the council, you know, when they receive this. And that our concern areas, we have 4 concern areas: harmony with the neighborhood, or neighbors, put it in which way you want. 2, whether this is the right density for this land. We have concerns about whether it's the right density. Number 3, we have concern, we need more details as to what the site will look like. So we need a more detailed site plan. And number 4, we need a realistic timetable. And I'll accept any friendly amendments if this gets a second. If somebody has a friendly amendment, I am open to that. So, there's my motion.
Okay, so I heard support of the concept plan, completion dates, whether this is the right density, that it's in harmony with the neighbors, and more site details. Did I capture
You kind of
those?
went backwards order, but you got all the ideas. You got all the ideas.
I'm
nailed it.
going up my list
you-
rather than down it. Okay,
Good.
so that is the motion. David, are you tracking that as well?
Yep.
Okay, and then, is there a second on that motion?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Woodward, second. So,
Friendly amendments.
you have no friendly amendments, just hostile amendments? And so, with that, is there any discussion on that motion? Okay, and before I call, I'm going to look to the applicant and say, do you understand that motion and what we're asking?
How detailed do you want the site plan? I understand.
We'll come back to that, but if, just making sure that you're tracking what the discussion, because it's been a weaving discussion. So, with that motion then, and any other discussion? Hearing none, I'm gonna bring that to a vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, so we have a motion that's approved, and, so David, I think if we can convey that to, in effect, to the city council, could you please inform Ms. Kinney about next steps for the adventure that she's on?
Yep, so this recommendation, will go before the city council during their regular meeting on Monday, February 7th at 7:30 PM. And then they will then make their own, make a motion of whether or not they agree with your recommendation, any other things that they might want to also see from the applicant.
And so, Ms. Kinney, I think if there are questions about some of the details of that, I would ask you to consult with David and his staff there to help guide you on what the details should look like, okay? Thank you so much for bringing this forward. It's been a fun discussion, to be honest with you about, and it's a difficult conversation because it's new and it's challenging, and so, well done bringing something that stimulates that much discussion, so. With that, I think I might have written all over my agenda. We're done with item 8A, and now it's time for a public forum. This is time allocated for citizens to bring matters not on the agenda to the attention of the Planning Commission, and time limits may be imposed. We're going to start the public forum at 8:08. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to the commission tonight on items not on the agenda? Is there anybody in the audience? And James, anybody online? Okay, thank you. Anyone that would wish to address the commission this evening? And last call for that. Anyone wishing to address the commission? No one coming to the table, then I would close the public hearing at 8:09, and we move forward now to the community director's report. Mr. Jansky.
Thank you, Mr. President. The only thing I have tonight is going to go back to discussing the zoning code. Jennifer Haskamp mentioned kind of that we discussed the schedule, so I wanted to go over that a little bit with you quickly. As she said, you know, our hope is to have a complete draft of the code to you within the next coming weeks, hopefully maybe in the first week of February. So what we're looking at again is the zoning map, table of uses, along with probably some of your recommendations, things that were discussed tonight will be presented to the city council on February 7th for their comments as well. We are moving into adoption stage of the code. So some of the things we'd like to do, February is going to be a big month. First in February, we haven't quite set a date yet. I'm working with Jennifer Mike to figure out what that date's going to be. Hopefully probably no later than the second week of February of holding a public open house. There again is going to be an opportunity for the public to come in. You know, we'll have graphics and different things up about high level, different changes to the code, the proposed zoning map, language for the code. The public come in, can view and ask questions about the code, hopefully doing that in February. Maybe no later than the second week in February. The other thing that we're going to be looking for is before this goes to the city council, per state statute, how this works is the planning commission is responsible for holding the actual public hearing about the adoption of the new zoning code. Because then it'd be an ordinance amendment. So it's your responsibility to hold that public hearing. What we're going to be asking is we believe that due to the importance of this matter, is that this actually be done in a special meeting the last week of February. So your regular meeting in February, let me pull up my calendar, is February 16th. So what we'd be asking is for you to be willing to hold a special meeting the week of February 21st for the sole purpose of conducting the public hearing and making recommendation to the city council to adopt the proposed zoning code. So with that, I guess my first question I'd had you have for the commission is what that Wednesday is February 23rd. Are there any concerns, conflicts potentially that you know of for February 23rd? It doesn't have to be a Wednesday. The 21st is a city council meeting, so I would ask maybe not the 21st. But
That's a holiday, is it not that's President's Day, a state holiday or city holiday?
I have to double check on that one if that's one of what
If it
that's.
is, that means Tuesday would not be in play for us if the city council.
Do we
meet
take,
on-
Steph, do we take that, do we take holiday, or is that one of our floaters? We do take that one off, so yes, then council would be on the 22nd of February.
So our options would be 23rd, 24th, 25th,
25th.
something like that, if we wanted it that week, right?
Yeah, correct.
23rd works for me.
Yeah.
Third works for me.
All right, body language, all right, all thumbs up on
Okay.
that. Let's go ahead and put that on
So
the
we'll
on the
plan on
calendar
having-
as a special meeting.
A special meeting on the
Sticking to Wednesdays
23rd for the purpose.
There will be beverages at that.
It'll cost you.
And then once that is complete, again, right now, at this time, we'll hold that. I'll confirm that with Jennifer and Mike, make sure we're good to go there. We've already kind of discussed it that week, so they should be aware of that. And then we'll make sure we get the public notice out as necessary for that as well. And if there's any changes to that, I'll make sure that the commission is aware. And then, once that is done, the recommendation will go to the city council in March. And then per the city charter, 2 readings, we go for first reading and consideration on March 7th. And then with the goal of actually having the council adopt the new zoning code March 21st. That's kind of our desired schedule right now. So by the end of March, we'll have a new zoning code. So that's where we are at, Mr. Chair. We are on the home stretch. I just want to thank
then
you
we're done.
all. This will be
We're banished.
not the last time I thank you all for your hard work of the last 14 months, but we are almost there. And I think that's, Mr. Chair, that's all I have for tonight.
So, David, just process question on this. So on the 16th of February, we will have the draft ordinance handed to us? Is that, this will be the first time we're going to see the package as an
Our goal
entirety.
is, I think our goal, my goal, Jennifer, Mike's goal would probably, I think our goal actually might have a draft in your hands either the first week of February or by the public, that open house at the very latest. So you'll have it before the 16th. So the 16th will be your regular meeting. And our goal is to have it a draft in your hand way before that. So you'll, at least 2 weeks prior to the public hearing, have a draft in your hands.
2 weeks prior to the public hearing, and prior to the 16th. I'm just trying to think, this will be the first time we see the whole package now together. And if there's any feedback from the commission, when and where does that occur in order to be able to bring that clean document to the 23rd?
I'll confer with Jennifer. I think if, we have it to the beginning of February, if there are any comments, major comments and concerns we can address them on the 16th so that we're ready for the 23rd. But I'll definitely confer with Jennifer on that.
I smell another meeting coming here.
That's what I'm wondering. First of all, are we headed that way? I don't know. That February's a short month, and or we're already going to be packing it full of
I think you
meetings.
gotta go 9, 16, 23, Wednesday, right? First review, discussion, final?
You could have that public open house also be a meeting if you wanted it to. And I gotta confer with Jennifer and Mike on what dates they're looking at and their availability.
So there's just a few open items that I think I think just in the reflection of the minutes, we haven't had a look at the color lighting stuff in the outdoor lighting, so there's stuff like that that's come in. It may be minor stuff when we look and say, looks great, but if there is any other things that we're picking up here, and then if there's new things we want to do, we've got to say that happens after March 21st, right? So those will be amendments to the new ordinance, and that makes sense just to shove that past, and we'll deal with that as an amendment to the revised ordinance. So I would hate to see a 9/16/23.
Come on. This is fun. We live for this stuff.
Join you on the 23rd.
I will share all the comments, Mr. Chair, with Jennifer and Mike, and then we'll get an action plan and I'll get it out to the commission.
Sounds great. So the more time we have to handle this on the front end, I think the more concise we can be, that we might be able to use the meeting on the 16th and do all your business and done. So it just depends on, I think it's helpful to get it as early as we can in our hands to be able to
Absolutely.
adapt. So, perfect. Did you have a comment, Mr. Erickson? Okay, thank you. All right, other updates, David?
I have nothing, Mr. Chair.
Then we're at commissioner comments and questions, and Mr. Yeager, can I start at your end?
I just want to add one thing. I don't know if you've, of course, as you guys know, I'm the park chair. So, but I can tell you that the Gregory Park skating rink and our new rink over at Mills has been constant use. I drive by Gregory every day, lit up great, looks fantastic, and Mills has been getting hit quite a bit. So that's all I have to add.
Thank you. I've put away my hockey gear because I can't keep up with the young kids anymore, but I'd love to be out there playing hockey with some of those kids. Mr. Gorham?
Just a bit of housekeeping. I think I've talked about this at an earlier meeting during the fall. The city website says my term ends on December of 2023. I will not be here in December of 2023, so my term actually does end in December of this year. So maybe the city website should reflect that. That's all. I ain't gonna be here.
At this time next year, you're saying?
No, yeah, in 2023 I won't be here.
Very good.
Exactly.
Mr. Calveras?
Nothing crazy. I do need to try out the ice rink at Mill. I live right by it, so it was a shame. The old ones go. My dad used to skate there when he was a kid, so. But yeah, the new one looks really good.
Yeah.
I'm anxious.
Excellent. Let me know and I'll cheer you on.
Will do.
It'll be the way I
think-
can participate.
I think Tad was gonna join me, so, right?
More about that when
Thank you, Matt. Ms. Woodward?
I don't have anything to add.
Thank you. Mr. Erickson?
my family and I, we did buy new skates last year, so we went to Bain Park and we're skating there a little bit last year. Haven't tried them this year, so I'll take you up on that. And then secondly, I'll reiterate what David said. I want to thank each and every one of you for all the work that we've put in on this. I know just being here, seeing the time and effort that we go through with all of this, and then extend that, of course, to James and David as well. So, and then of course Jennifer as well. And then lastly, I'm looking forward to as we're entering this home stretch, just conferring more with you, David, and Chairman Duvall, at communicating that as liaison to council as we move into adoption. So, fourth quarter.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Thank you.
Up by 3. So, well, I think, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to serve as chair again. I think I carried, with assumptions, I carried in sort of what I thought was a previous commission's intent to say, while we're giving up a night, let's fill it, make sure we do good deliberation, good discussion. And I think over the course of last year, I feel like maybe that wasn't a shared experience. So I think what I'm going to try and do this year is try and manage time better so that we don't go as late every night as we have on these things. Where the agenda drives it, let's do that. But I'll try and manage a little bit more. And so places to do that might be on not leaving as much hang time on discussion. But I do want to offer people the opportunity to be able to speak, and there's a balance between allowing you to formulate your comments and your ideas and not necessarily extending the meeting long if there's nothing more to be said. So I'll try and find that balance, but I want to respect your time and thank you for the time that you give and see if we can't be a little bit tighter. So with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn on time.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
There you go.
Second.
All right, and a second, any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank